Assalamu alaikum. I wanted to talk about something very important, the 4 deadly mistakes in a relationship, because I get a lot of questions regarding relationships, how to improve them, what to do if they're not well. So let's talk about these 4 deadly mistakes, which are through the Gottman Institute, where they studied relationships for a very long period. They spent 30 years studying couples, various couples, to see what are the most common and the most dangerous, most damaging traits of people that cannot stay together. So they were able to identify 4 very, very important mistakes that people make. And what they saw, they had it down to such an accuracy level that when they studied couples, even for just 10-15 minutes, they were able to predict with a very, very high percentage of accuracy that this type of couple is not going to be able to stay together, this couple's marriage is going to end up in divorce, and then these types of people are going to be able to make it work. It was so accurate that people started paying attention, and then they started learning from them. So these are 4 traits, and I'm going to tell them in the 4 different traits, but not in order of importance. They are all equally important, and if they are present in your relationship, you should know that these can cause very serious damage. If you have more than 1 in your relationship, then you are even in more trouble, and if you have more than 2, then you are really headed towards disaster. So you need to make sure that if you have any of these traits in your relationship, you need to work on yourself, perhaps individually and perhaps as a couple together, so that you can delete this, remove this from your relationship, and inshallah you will have a healthy, balanced relationship. So the number 1 trait I am going to talk about is criticism. So what happens when we have too much criticism in a relationship? That criticism creates distance. You know, when nobody wants to be around people that are going to constantly remind them where they are going wrong, what they are not doing correctly. I understand that sometimes we have to let the other person know that they're doing something that is perhaps not an ideal behavior, but there are ways to do that in a way that it doesn't sound like criticism, because criticism is hurtful and it can damage relationships. A lot of times people say, well, this is constructive criticism, this is healthy criticism. But are you able to take healthy criticism? If you're constantly dishing it out, do you have the ability to take criticism as well? Most often the answer is no. We are able to criticize others saying that, oh, I'm doing it for your benefit. But when the tables are turned and somebody criticizes us, we don't call it healthy, or we tell the other person, you're not qualified enough to give me healthy criticism. So it's not good in any situation, so constructive or otherwise. If you want to guide someone in a positive way, the best way to do it is when they are doing something that you like, that you want to encourage, appreciate it. When they do something that you don't like, don't say anything. Instead of just constantly criticizing, just ignore it. If they love you, if they're aware enough, that behavior is naturally going to start shifting. Obviously, if they're doing something that you just can't stand and the marriage is overall bad, then why are you in a relationship anyway? So I'm addressing this for people that are generally in a healthy relationship and they want to take out some of the issues that might lead to bigger problems later on. Now, criticism leads to another behavior, which is actually number 2 on our list, which is defensiveness. So when 2 people are engaged in a conversation, they are honestly sharing their feelings, how they feel in this relationship, then both people will stay engaged, they will be open. But the moment criticism starts, then the other person is going to start getting defensive. And defensiveness is the second negative trait in this list. So why is that? When we become defensive, let's say that our partner came to us and they wanted to share their feelings. We did something a couple of days ago which hurt their feelings, and they want to share that with us. Now, this is true for couples. It's also true for friends or any kind of relationship. When somebody comes to share their hurt feelings, instead of just being present with their hurt feelings and acknowledging that, I'm sorry that you're feeling hurt, what we do is we try to justify our behavior. We become defensive. So when they are speaking, we are no longer listening to them. In our minds, we are already preparing our defense. So we have effectively left the communication at that time. And then what happens is then the other person becomes defensive, we become more defensive, and then eventually the two people are not talking anymore. Their egos are basically engaged in a self-righteous fight. You know, I'm right, or I'm right, you are wrong. Communication never takes place, and it's never productive. So when you have a habit of being critical, what I would advise you to do is pick your battles. What are the two most important things that you have to address? Only address those. Don't address the other stuff. Because why is it that you would have the right to be totally critical of the other person when you can't take any criticism yourself? You become defensive, and yet you feel you have the right to keep criticizing the other person. Criticism makes the other person feel small. We don't do that to the people that we love. However, this is the behavior we observe in couples, in how parents treat their children. It's very, very damaging. Excessive criticism is very damaging. It pushes the person to go into constantly being defensive, and when they grow up or they're in the real world, they are always in defensive mode. What that means, what that signals the brain, is that I am not safe. In this relationship, I'm not safe because I always have to be defensive. So we start viewing the other person, our partner, as the enemy who is constantly attacking us, and we have to defend ourselves. So as you can see, just through criticism, we can trigger these negative behaviors in a really big way and cause a lot of distance in the relationship. The third trait, which I have seen a lot, is contempt. Contempt is when we don't want to say and we don't want to address the other person's behavior, but inside we are feeling that this person is less than. We have thoughts in our mind in which we are labeling them with names such as weak, characterless, liar, you know, those kinds of things. And yet we are claiming that we love them because we're in a marriage or in a relationship. But we are constantly using the language of contempt, whether it's in our heart or we can sometimes be voicing it too. We are verbalizing those feelings as well. Contempt, these two C's, contempt and criticism, are extremely damaging. I can tell you without a doubt, if you have these two C's, contempt and criticism, in your relationship, this relationship will not survive. Now, of course, in India and Pakistan, a lot of times women feel they don't have a choice, or men also sometimes feel they don't have a choice. They have to stay in a marriage. But that's not what I'm calling the commitment. You know, you could be in a marriage in name only, but both partners checked out long time ago. They're just living under the same roof, they're just dragging a dead horse, but the marriage itself is no longer there. And instead, there is pain, there is misery, there's this feeling of helplessness, of being stuck. So this is, I'm just at number 3, and you can see how these behaviors can cause extreme distress and feelings of loneliness, and instead of love, there is resentment and sometimes even hatred. The last one on this list is stonewalling. What does stonewalling mean? Stonewalling is when, this is also a negative behavior in relationships where we are now choosing to disconnect from our partner, but instead of using contempt or criticism or defensiveness, we're going to stonewall, which means I'm just not going to hear anything, I'm just not going to feel anything, I'm not going to show any reaction. Sometimes this is a coping mechanism in a relationship because it was becoming too painful, and we couldn't deal with it, or it could also be that this is a pattern from our past. This is a pattern from our past, and this is the way we have dealt with emotions in our life, so we just stonewall. So now, what is the opposite of stonewalling? The opposite of stonewalling is what I have learned from the top mentors in the world. There are 2 rules, golden rules of relationships. If we can keep those as a habit, they help us to navigate through even the murky, dark waters of relationships when we have conflict, and that is authenticity, being 100% authentic in the relationship, being transparent, so there's nothing hidden, we don't hide our feelings, and then third is the ability to be vulnerable. As you can see, these are interconnected. You can't be vulnerable if you can't be authentic. You can't be transparent if you're not authentic. So these three are very closely connected, and they are the guiding lines and lights in relationships. If you continue to do that, because in order to be authentic, transparent, and vulnerable, you have to have a deep connection with yourself, with your own self, and you have to be authentic and transparent with your own self. So these are the opposite of these four apocalyptic horsemen. So let's try, if you can, just notice one or two behaviors that are negative in your relationships from this list, and if you can replace them with something more positive, that is going to have a huge impact on your relationship. And better yet, if you can sit down with your partner and talk about these four traits and how maybe they're in their behavior, maybe they're in your behavior, but what can you do together to address this so that the two of you can experience more happiness, more joy, and a more fulfilling relationship.